Right, hello, welcome back for the second half. So as I'm recording this, I just want to say we've just watched the here in Bétet, the French-English football match. And it's right poised right at the end, looks like France are winning. And I just want to say that's a sort of better form of combat than killing each other. There was a time the French and the English used to fight each other and hack each other to pieces. In the 100 Years' War for 100 years. You know, football's a much better way. So it's a sort of slightly civilized way of dealing with tribalism, aggression, nationalism, all that. And that's why I'm a supporter of the European Union, because that's another more civilized way of dealing with national differences. Whether you're Dutch or Belgian or German or Polish or Spanish or whatever, you know, we can get on. And all of these nations were largely Christian. And so that's a way of manifesting that agape, which is at the heart of the Christian tradition. That kind of disinterested love, compassion. And really it doesn't matter who wins the football, as long as the game is played fair and the best team wins. You know, that's the idea of sport. That's what I was taught at Brighton College. The kind of ethic of... they used to call that muscular Christianity. It was Christianity that you had to live in an engaged life. Anyway, so let's see who wins. I hope the best team win. Meanwhile, we're going to press on here, this historic moment, and look at the next one in our list of Christians, which is the Jehovah's Witnesses, 134, box 134. They're another interesting tradition, founded more recently in the early 1900s by an American who believed that, again, there was time for a new dispensation. People up to that point hadn't really been reading the Bible properly. He began studying Bible studies. That was the core idea. It was really a group for Bible studies in New York and Chicago and places. And can you pass me let's have a look. That red book there, yeah. Yes, that one, yeah. I just want to get the exact dates because it's quite important. Thank you so much. And the idea was that through proper Bible study, you can become a witness. You can bear witness to Jehovah's awesome presence in history. Jehovah is the name for God in the Bible, and it began as the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and also called the International Bible Students Association. So really all the founder, who was called C.T. Russell, wanted people to do was actually just read the Bible and study it. Now with that I'm 100% in accord. And I've had many Jehovah's Witnesses as friends in my life. And you know, I've been quite close to some of them. Interestingly enough, now living in France, I have a local friend who's a Jehovah's Witness, who's a descendant of Voltaire, the French Freemason, and she comes round to visit me often, you know, once a month, whatever, and we chat in French about God and the goddess and Druids and Jehovah and biblical studies, you know, and she's very interested in my views, and I find her a knowledgeable and wise person, as a descendant of Voltaire should be. When I lived in Wales, the Jehovah's Witnesses used to come round and see me there in my farmhouse cottage in Llanerville. And you know, I explained, look, I'm not a Jehovah's Witness, but I am, in a sense, I bear witness to Jehovah and his awesome work in history. But I don't just read the one Bible of the Christian Church. I read all the Bibles of all humanity, and I find the God behind God more interesting than just Jehovah. I wouldn't want to say which is the best God out of all of them. Is it Shiva? Is it Yahweh? Is it Horus? Is it Osiris? That's why I've just finished a tarot of the gods. I've done a book of tarot with all the gods having their entry, including Yahweh or Jehovah. Yahweh is the proper pronunciation. But anyway, the Jehovah's Witnesses were founded by this man, Charles Taze Russell, 1852 to 1916, who set up a chain of drapery shops in Allegheny in Pennsylvania. He didn't like the idea of hell either. He didn't want eternal suffering for people in hell, so I agree with that. He did want to try and find out if we can find out when the second coming is going to happen. Because one of the big things in the Bible, the last book of Revelation, says that Christ is going to come back and make everything right. Christ is going to come back and defeat the forces of evil. And then everybody will live happily ever after, in sort of paradise world. And this man, Charles Russell, wanted to move that forward, bring it forward. Let's have that now, please, in my lifetime. And he announced first it was going to be 1874, when he was 22. Then when that didn't happen, he said it's going to be 1914. But unfortunately, of course, we know that what happened in 1914 was not the second coming, it was the start of World War I. An absolute catastrophe in which 20 million people died and slaughtered each other. So this chap Russell got his dates wrong, is all we can say. And I think that's going to always happen if you try and fix God's timing with a historical juncture. I mean, people have been trying this ages before. In about 1,000, they all thought the world was going to end in 1000 AD. Medieval Christians here in France, they all thought, well, it's the second coming. It's got to be. It's 1000 AD. We've been waiting 1,000 years. You know, it's time for God to come back and send us Jesus again. We'll sort everything out. He didn't turn up. But what we did have was the founding of the universities. We had tremendous flourishing of knowledge and arts. We had the University of Paris being set up. We had, in a sense, a second coming of wisdom. We had Aristotle retranslated into Latin. You know, we had like the beginnings. It's called the First Renaissance. And then other people started going on in the 17th century that there'll be a second coming of, you know, the end of the world and the Last Judgment. Christ will come back during the 1600s. And the Rosicrucians were thought to be maybe there. They've appeared to announce that. But actually that didn't happen either. Instead we got scientific method. We got the revival of lost arts and sciences. We got new developments in mathematics and, I'd say, in comparative religion. Spinoza founded scientific biblical studies, you know. We had knowledge of the Kabbalah come through. So I think I probably differ from Charles Taze Russell's view of the second coming. I'm more with Rudolf Steiner, who said, well, Christ's already come back. It's just we have to learn to get the eyes to see him. He's already there if we just learn to watch. But anyway, so he was quite a chap. He you know, he wanted to make the Bible come real. He did huge sermons. He did photodramas of the Bible story with coloured slides and films, and even synchronized gramophone records. He lived till 1916, so he was trying to use new technology to bring the Bible alive. And they've been trying ever since, Jehovah's Witnesses, that he founded. I mean, one of the very good things about them was they're pacifists. They refuse to fight. They believe, as I do, that Christ taught non-violence. But that's not to be interpreted as meaning you just, like if somebody attacks you, you just smile and that will hit you. That's sort of, that's non-resistance. Non-violence, truly, and I think the Jehovah's Witnesses know this, is you have to go to the cause of what's causing them to attack you in the first place. You have to try and educate them so that they stop their tomfoolery. And I know that the Jehovah's Witnesses have been very active in many countries around the world, teaching this form of Christian non-violence. And they often pay the penalty. They're persecuted and locked up. They were in World War I and World War II. They were imprisoned, both by the Nazis and by the communists, because they refused to take part in these wars, you know. And in today's Putin's Russia, they're being persecuted. A lot of them are in jail because they don't agree with Putin and his wars and the Ukraine war. So that is a very good thing the Jehovah's Witnesses have done as Christians. They're promoting a peace orientation, and that's, you know, why I get on so well with Voltaire's descendant. They believe that, and this is where I don't quite agree with my friend, that things are so bad here on earth that the forces of evil are so strong that there will be a cataclysmic Armageddon. There's going to be a third world nuclear war. It just can't be avoided. And only 144,000 good saints are going to survive who will go to heaven. Well, I find that a bit stingy. There's 6, 7 billion, 8 billion people on the planet. I mean, why only 144,000 are going to be saved? I mean, is there no more room on the spaceship in heaven? I mean, and also I don't really agree with this. There's got to be an Armageddon, it's inevitable. If I was God, or even some little tiny drop of godliness, I'd try to stop Armageddon, because that will destroy an awful lot of humans. And as I say, most humans are not evil. They're like big pussycats, really. And it will destroy the trees and nature and the animals. I mean, the Ukraine war is tragic, but one of the tragic things is there's loads of cats without a home wandering around Ukraine freezing to death. You see photographs because their owners have died or had to flee. And so the poor old cats in Ukraine are freezing to death with nothing, Like, I want a world that's run by love, not by hatred. I believe that's authentic biblical teaching. I don't care what you are outwardly, a Jew, a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Druid. I think that kingdom of love is what we should all be going for. And I think the Jehovah's Witnesses should therefore read their Bible in a bit more detail. And one of the conversations I've had with them over the years is I've always tried to introduce to my Jehovah's Witness friends the concept of biblical studies, which ironically is not really there, because they read the Bible very literally and they don't read it Kabbalistically. They've never heard of the Kabbalah. This guy Russell presumably never did. They don't realise the Bible is layered with meanings, and that you can't really read it until you've done your course in Kabbalah and Gnosticism and Christian esotericism and stuff. But apart from that, they're great and we love them. Okay, let's look at the next one, 135, which I've sort of hinted at a bit, and this is the Rastafarian branch of Christianity that arose in Jamaica in the 1940s and 50s. And it was connected with the work of Marcus Garvey, 1887 to 1940, who was a spokesman for this idea that Africa is God's chosen continent and that God is working his miracles through Africa. After all, it was in Egypt that Christ had taken refuge. Moses was trained in all the magic of the Egyptians of Africa. And the Ethiopian church is one of the oldest churches in the history of Christianity. So the Rastafarians look back to the Ethiopian church as their motherland. And the emperor, Haile Selassie, was called Ras Tafari. That was his official name, like King Charles III. And he was crowned in 1930. And so these poor black communities living in Jamaica, who realised they really were Africans, they'd been transported as slaves, their ancestors, to Jamaica. But Africa was their spiritual homeland. They were Christian, but they wanted to find the real kind of Christianity. So they decided it had to be in Ethiopia. And they saw Rastafari, the great Ethiopian king, who was the head of the church, as their kind of saviour figure. Unfortunately, Italy, under a fascist ruler, Mussolini, invaded Ethiopia at this time, conquered it militarily, and Haile Selassie had to flee. But they didn't lose their faith. At one point, Haile Selassie even became a refugee in the Welsh Marches, near where I used to live, in England and Wales. And that, his life was fascinating. So the Rastafaris carried on in Jamestown and in Jamaica, and they developed a theology that is quite interesting, the Rastafari theology, which is, in the Rastafarian language of Christianity, every man is called a king, and every woman is called a queen. You give each other respect at the highest possible levels. And when you greet a fellow Rastafarian and you say, "Hello, King." And they say back to you, "Yeah, greetings, King." I was taught this by a Rastafarian in Brighton once who greeted me as the King of Water. I lived in Scotland, and he said, "I'm the King of Fire." He was a magician from Jamaica who was selling stuff in Brighton, which he'd imported from Jamaica, all kinds of things. Lovely man, actually. And the other thing that the Rastafarians believe is that God sends sacraments to humanity, the healing herbs, and one of the most powerful is ganja, or cannabis, which is a sacred healing herb. If you use it wisely, don't fool around with it, it's not a party game. But if you use it properly, it can bring about divine conversations between people. And a proper Rastafarian sacrament will be like we'd call it a talking heads party. So it's 5 people sharing a couple of very powerful joints. And before you know it, they're talking about the kingdom of God, and they're actually like going to heaven together. It has that powerful psychedelic effect on people. And the Rastafarians say this is their sacrament. And they fought for the right to have their cannabis use just as much as Catholics want their wine on a Sunday in their sacrament of, Holy Communion. The Rastas say, no, we want our joints. And, I think they should be allowed that. That's fine. I think it is a holy thing for them. And it's a holy thing if you know what you're doing. It's been sacred since the time of Shiva and before. The ancient Celts and Druids have used cannabis as a sacred tool for consciousness elevation. And the Rastafarians are quite strong on this. We want our religious freedom, they say. And they say that's what Christ would want for us. Because he was obviously a spiritual revolutionary. He wasn't a kind of a Tory voting, cowardly legalist who would sit behind and say, oh, we can't do that, it's against the law. The Holodomor was against the law, the Holocaust was against the law. Was done with the law. So to be a legalist, if you shelter within what is legal, you would have said, oh, well, Holocaust, well, that's fine, it's legal. People said it's fine, Holodomor, famine, kill off Ukrainians, no, that's legal. Stalin says it's legal. The crucifixion of Christ was legal according to the rules of the court that sentenced him. So the Rastafarians would say you've got to go a bit beyond what is legal at any one time and go into the rainbow zone where you follow morality and not legality. Because legality is always slow. It's like Dobbin the donkey trying to catch up to the racing camel. So anyway, that's the Rastafarians, and of course they have their music, as well as ganja, they have their reggae. I remember once going to see the Wailers, who were their great group, live in Bristol in the 70s. It was, those are exciting times. And that idea of bringing Babylon down, which is at the heart of Rastafarian culture. I have a wonderful book of Rastafarian theology about how to bring Babylon down, which is their word for corruption in high places. You do it through truth and the power of truth, which is what I'm trying to do in these courses. My work as a teacher is premised on that, bringing truth to power and bringing Babylon down. Not that I don't like some aspects of Babylon, because I quite like Babylonian theology. It is number 21 in the pyramid table. Let's hear it for the wisdom people of Babylon and their great, sages. But that's another conversation. Okay, let's move on. So we have another interesting tradition called the Unification Church, number 136. Now this is associated with Korea and a particular founder in Korea who Reverend Sung Myung Moon, who was raised as a Korean Confucian. He became a Baptist, he became a Christian later on. He was an intelligent man. He lived through the Korean War in the 1950s when his country fell into a terrible conflict between the northern communist Korea fighting the southern Free Korea, as they would call it. And he was rescued from a prison cell. He was captured and held captive by the communists by an American soldier who later became a very important figure in American politics called Alexander Haig, who was actually just then a frontline commander who happened to rescue him. I learned that because I went to a conference they organised and invited me to in Seoul, in Korea, in the late 1990s, and Al Haig was speaking. I didn't meet Reverend Moon, who was still alive, an old man. If you read the theology behind the Unification Church, it's very interesting. What they're trying to do is reconcile Eastern thought, Confucian, Taoist, Buddhist, with Christian thought. And they've done it in quite a deep way. I mean, Moon is a clever man, a scholar of sorts, and he believes that we need a new kind of Christianity which isn't just wedded to the original historical basis of it. So Christianity, if it's true, if Christ really was the Messiah for all, then it has to be true for all humanity, for all tribes, all cultures, all places, and people of all religions. And if it's not true, if he was just a local Messiah, just for the tribe of the Jews and a few Romans that wanted to join him, well, that's fine, that's fine. But that's not what Reverend Moon thought we want, which is an authentic universalist Christianity. And so he set out to found it. And he integrated Eastern thought, Oriental thought, and Western thought into this great synthesis. And he called it the Unification Church, by which he means the church that will unify all humanity into one kingdom of love. Now, I think that's a noble aim, and I was invited to go and speak and attend a conference they organise on interfaith work. The Unification Church are quite good nowadays on interfaith work. They invited me to Seoul in Korea. It's my first and only visit to Korea. It's an amazing city. Absolutely loved it. And it was a very high-level conference. That's where I met Ninian Smart, who was Professor of Religious Studies in Britain, one of the founders of the discipline of comparative religion. It's the only time I met him. He was invited too, so it's a great honour to go. And I wish them well. They're like all religious groups, they're accused of all kinds of stuff. I've never seen evidence of any wrongdoing that they've been doing, but they do quiet work and there's a new attempt to work with youth around the world, run in Britain by a wonderful Londoner, black Londoner, who's invited me to speak a couple of times in their online events. So they're gently doing the work of unifying humanity. But we would no doubt want to have some profound theological discussions. I don't know that Reverend Moon knows much about Druids and some of the esoteric stuff, Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and so on. But I think he would be interested in it, is what I can say. The other thing that he's quite big on is that marriage is a very good thing. He likes to marry people because he thinks we should all have a partner, a mate, and get married and live happily ever after to survive in this difficult physical world. And he tends to do mass weddings. So he'll marry 20,000 couples in a football field in Korea in one service. That's taking the thing seriously. It's quite sweet, really. Right, okay, the next one we're going to look at is, and we're coming to the end of our Christians, is mystical Christianity. There's about 3 million Unification Church people, by the way, at the moment. Then we come to our mystical Christians, and, you see, if you've been paying attention, you'll realise there are probably mystical Christians in all of these boxes. There's one or two in all of them. And what is a mystic? A mystic is someone that has been to the mysteries. That's the origin of the phrase. And it came out of the ancient mysteries of Greece, Eleusis and Samothrace places. Someone who'd actually had experience of the mysteries that we're talking about. I mean, Christ was a mystic. He'd obviously been to the mysteries. That's why he was able to speak with authority when they asked him, "Why are you talking about this, Rabbi? Where's your authority from?" Anyone with any intelligence would have worked out, well, he's been to the place of the mysteries. Whether he physically ever went to them, we don't know. Probably in Egypt, yes. Whether he went to them in other places, well, let's look at the evidence. But certainly he went to them on an inward journey. And so do all true initiates, people that search for the higher meaning of life. A very great Frenchman called Edward Chouret wrote a book called The Great Initiates, which is still today one of the best books on this stuff. And he talks about Orpheus and Plato and Pythagoras and Christ as always being sort of mystic initiates into the one universal truth, which underlies all the boxes. It doesn't, in a sense, matter which door you go in through. You might go in through the Shinto door, or the Sikh door, or the Muslim door, or the Jewish door. They all lead to the many chambered palace of the gods beyond. And that's what it means to go to the mysteries. It means just to go through the door. And there are people that have studied this in what is mysticism. This sense of an interior revelation that comes to one is, I think, the core of it. It's part of Meister Eckhart's teachings in the Catholic Church, one of the greatest mystics of medieval Christian teaching. He had to use paradoxical language in his sermons to shock the congregation into gnosis. I mean, I can imagine a vicar coming to Sleeping Maitette on a Sunday, giving a sermon, and like Meister Eckhart, it would make people sit up. I mean, he'd say things like, "You're sitting there waiting for me to explain what God is, but I tell you, you cannot understand what God is unless you find Him in yourself. Don't listen to me or look at me. Look within yourself. That's where you'll find where God is." So mysticism is about the interior journey, finding within. I'm interested in mystics that also use scholarship, because I think that whilst, yes, the interior journey means looking within, I think it's also important to look at what other people have found within, which is the point of the periodic table, the point of philosophy. So that as we look within ourselves, we might find totally new stuff, but we also want to avoid becoming a fraudster that finds some golden plates that are based on a novel. I mean, that's false mysticism, and we should, by studying, we learn to avoid those pitfalls. It's based on the life of prayer for Christians, and that means a sort of communion with God. People have tried to define prayer. What is it? Well, it's silence, a communing with the Absolute, and then a conversation arises. One communes with God through language. And the Gnostics were obviously mystics. So anyway, mysticism in Christianity is a wonderful subject. Moving on, coming to towards the end, liberation theology is number 138. About 2 million people. Now this is interesting. It's often associated with South American Catholic theology. That's where it grew up, this idea of liberation theology. So theology means thinking and teaching and reflecting on the nature of God and what God wants for us by reading the Holy Scriptures, right? Liberation theology says, okay, well, having done that, let's then apply it in practice. Let's get up and transform society. Let's liberate ourselves from oppression, poverty, injustice, war, sexism, violence, And what can we do as Christians or priests or whatever to help liberate the entire community? Okay, so we can set up food banks. I mean, in Brexit Britain now, people are so poor, they've been led down the garden path by their stupid, corrupt, elite rulers that they have to survive on food banks. They don't have enough money to eat and heat the home and clothe. So they have to go to the food bank and get some basic survival stuff, which is absurd in one of the richest countries in the world. Now, from a liberation theology perspective, this is caused by a corrupt elite who've taken control of the country in the form of the Tory party, and want people to feel small, want people to feel broken, want people to feel humbled. So they just queue up for a few bags of rice, instead of actually coming together in communities, creating what liberation theologians call base communities. So you create a sort of like an extended family attached to the church, with a priest, but with local people running the show and you share study, you share theology, but you also share food, you share art, music, dance, friendship. That's what liberation theology is about. And by doing that, we liberate ourselves from injustice and oppression. And anyway, that swept all over Latin America. There's some very, very great theologians who advocate this. They tend to be on the left politically, but they're not in the narrow Marxist mode because Marx was an atheist. They say, let's take from Marx what's useful, social science-wise, about the analysis of capital and its corruption. But let's reject his atheism and his scientism and his determinism. And let's put God back into history. Because if God wanted Moses and the Israelites to be free, and God wanted the early Christians to be free, doesn't God want the poor of Latin America to be free? Well, by extension, liberation theology is extended now. I've met liberation theologians in Palestine, among the Arab Christian community in Bethlehem, who are saying, yes, God wants liberation also for the Palestinians, who are the original homeland of Christ, after all, and who are now suffering, through no fault of their own, from the after effects of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust in Europe. So the Jews all fled there, and there wasn't enough room, so they've been fighting ever since. So to become liberated from all that is another job for liberation theology. And my friend Zugby, who runs the WIAM Centre in Nazareth, who's a liberation theologian, Palestinian Christian, he's just become head of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Great man. I interviewed him for my Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East when I was there. And, they're our brothers. I think we need liberation theology in Britain now because of Brexit and all the stupid Tory misrule. In Africa, there are liberation theologians. So this is a powerful and important tradition, and Segundo is probably my favourite of their theologians. Very, very sophisticated thinkers. Then we come to nearly the end, 139, shamanic and miscellaneous Christianity. Now this is an interesting box because, what's that? Shamanic? No, that's pagan. Shaman is box number one. Right? I've met Christians who call themselves Christian shamans and say Christ was a shaman. He was doing magical work to reconcile heaven and earth. He was doing ascensions, which is what shamans do. He may well have been encouraging his disciples to take magic mushrooms, which is what some theologians have argued, because that's a liberational tool. And so when there's a chap who's a professor in New Mexico at a theological academy, who's written a book called Shamanic Christianity, in which he argues that we have to get back to the real roots of spirituality and shamanism. But we can stay being Christians as well, of any kind. I happen to be, an Anglican, but it doesn't matter. I'm a shamanic Christian first and foremost, as a Druid, because Druidry is simply Celtic shamanism. So, as a shaman, I'm a shapeshifter. I work with the spirit world. I work with the animal kingdoms. I work with Mother Nature, and a liberation that involves only humanity, which destroys the earth in an Armageddon, is not on the cards as a shamanic Druid Christian. That's why I won't accept that theology from the Jehovah's Witnesses. God wants a third world war because then he can get on with the judgment. For God's sake, what about the poor cats and the animals and the trees? I want a shamanic redemption from Christ for all nature and all earth, so that we learn to share this earth in peace, all interspecies